This is embarrassing. It's embarrassing because this whole organization of theirs, to me, is a scam only in that they're not doing the good.
$15,578,951. That is what American Friends of the Royal Foundation reported in contributions and revenue for the 2024 financial year, according to its Form 990 filed with the United States tax authorities. Now hold that number against another one, $2,142,653. That is the cash contributions figure Archewell Foundation reported in its own 2024 filing. Two very different scales, two very different stories.
I feel like there's probably so much wasted money if you give it to Archewell versus just give it to these charities directly. That's what I'm trying to say.
Let me be careful right at the top, because this matters. These are two separate charities. American Friends of the Royal Foundation is a United States nonprofit that raises money connected to the working royal platform. Archewell is the organization Harry and Meghan built after they left. Those figures are not a public vote. They are not a referendum on who people love more, and money on a tax form is not a scorecard for how much good a charity does in the world. I want that understood before we go one step further, because the point here is not the size of a single number. The point is what the money trail reveals about a decision, because the more revealing figure is not the 15 million or the 2 million, it is a much smaller one, buried in the 2019 audited accounts of the Royal Foundation.
I don't need them as the middleman. I don't need to pay a charity through them. I'd rather just pay the charities. They could literally have a website of donate to these charities, everybody, please.
That year, the foundation recorded an unrestricted grant of £145,000 paid to Sussex Royal, and the stated purpose, in the accounts themselves, was to facilitate setup of the new charity. Read that again. The institution they were walking away from helped pay for the machinery of the walk. So the story I want to trace is not a one-year snapshot. It is what it actually means to leave a mature, functioning charitable platform, the kind with staff and donors and long-running programs and an American fundraising arm already attached, and then try to build a replacement from scratch. That is the real consequence hiding inside the money trail. And by the time we reach the most recent reporting, the word independent starts to feel a lot more complicated than it did on the day they announced it. I have always maintained that loyalty tells you who someone really is. Not the speeches, not the interviews, the loyalty. And when you look at what the Royal Foundation records show about the exit, the loyalty question gets very loud, very fast. Because this was not two people cast out into the cold with nothing but a grievance. The paperwork tells a different story, and paperwork does not do publicity tours. To understand that £145,000, you have to understand what the Sussexes actually had inside the Royal Foundation before they left. This was not a favor from strangers. The 2019 annual report states plainly that the charity was formerly known as the Royal Foundation of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Their names were on it. It was a shared platform, Prince William and Princess Catherine alongside Harry and Meghan, a single institutional home for 4 working royals and the causes they championed. Then, according to those same 2019 accounts, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex decided to leave to establish their own charitable organization. That is the record. And here is the part that I think people never sit with long enough. The foundation did not slam the door. The trustees recorded that they agreed to provide financial and operational support through the transition, while retaining the legacy projects that stayed behind. Support during the transition. Read in the driest possible accounting language that is an institution helping its departing members leave. And then the number. An unrestricted grant of £145,000 to Sussex Royal, described in the accounts as money to facilitate setup of the new charity. Unrestricted. No strings written into it. Just help getting the new thing off the ground. The report separately records a further sum, £151,856, connected to Travelist, which is its own line and its own story. So I am not going to blend those two figures into one dramatic total, because that would not be honest, and it would not be the record. But the 145,000 stands on its own, and it stands as something striking. The platform they would later describe as suffocating, as cold, as a place that gave them nothing but pain. That same platform cut a check to help finance their departure. I find that almost impossible to square with the story that came afterward. You do not usually get a leaving gift from a prison, because that is the framing that eventually took hold, isn't it? The institution as the villain, the institution as the cage, the institution as the thing that had to be escaped for the sake of survival. And I am not here to tell anyone how they felt inside those walls, because feelings are not on a tax form. But actions are, grants are, And the 2019 action was generosity, recorded, audited, and signed off. That is the receipt that the later narrative simply cannot absorb. So when I hear the monarchy described as nothing but constraint, I think about that line in the 2019 accounts. Financial and operational support through the transition. The machine did not fight them on the way out. It helped. And that to me is the first crack in the American dream story, because it means the people who walked did not walk with nothing. They walked with a running start that the institution itself paid to give them. The money, though, was never really the whole platform. The £145 was the send-off. The real loss was the machine behind it, and that is what I want to lay out next, because a mature charitable platform is not a logo you can peel off and reprint somewhere sunnier. Look at what the Royal Foundation actually reported in its 2024 audited accounts, and the scale of the thing becomes clear. Total income of £12,168,503. Spending on charitable activity of £9,862,698. An average of 67 employees across the year, up from 48 the year before. This is not a personal brand with a website. This is an operating institution with a payroll. And it is not vague, feel-good money either. The program spending is named, line by line. Homelessness, £4,368,825. Early years, £2,214,897. United for Wildlife, £1,783,920. Community Impact, £1,056,905. Those are established causes with structure underneath them, running year after year, staffed and funded and reported. Now I want to be fair to the record, because the accounts are fair to themselves. Those same 2024 accounts state that some of the grants are funded through outside sources and key donors. So I am not going to pretend every single pound is unrestricted royal treasure poured from a golden tap. It is not. Restricted funds exist, outside money supports some of the programs, and the accounts say so openly. I am not going to overstate it, because I do not need to. Here is why I do not need to. The architecture is the point, not the exact origin of every pound. 67 people, long-running programs with names and histories. A donor base, audited accounts that a serious institution stands behind, and crucially, an American fundraising route already wired into the structure. That is what a mature platform gives you. It gives you continuity, credibility, and reach that took years and, frankly, centuries of institutional weight to build. You cannot recreate that with a launch announcement and a mission statement. That is the thing I think gets lost in all the talk about freedom and independence. Freedom from what, exactly? Freedom from a working machine that had homelessness programs and wildlife programs and early years programs already funded and staffed and moving. When you leave that, you are not shedding a constraint. You are giving up an engine that other people spent a very long time building. And the most American piece of that engine is not speculation on my part. It has its own public tax record, sitting right there in the United States filing system for anyone to read. That is where the money trail gets genuinely interesting, because the bridge to America that Harry and Meghan supposedly had to build for themselves already existed, attached to the very platform they left behind. The key is what the $15 million actually is, and just as importantly, what it is not. American Friends of the Royal Foundation is a separate United States 501c3, a Delaware nonprofit, and its FY 2024 filing reports $15,578,951 in contributions and revenue. That is a real number on a real return, and the year before it reported $8,590,000, so it grew, and grew heavily. Now, here is the boundary I will not cross, because it would be the easy lie. That $15 million did not all become UK Royal Foundation income. It did not all cross the Atlantic. American Friends is its own organization with its own expenses and its own net assets. So what actually reached the UK Foundation from that American route? The Royal Foundation's own 2024 accounts answer it directly. They record £2,566,452 in grant income from American Friends in 2024, compared with £1,659,667 the year before. So the flow is real, it is growing, and it is documented on both sides of the ocean. An American fundraising arm feeding a British institution, more this year than last. That is what an established platform looks like when it reaches across borders. It does not hold a press conference about the reach. It just files the grant income and moves on. And this is where I think the independent story starts to look shaky in a way it never gets called out for. The narrative was always that America was the bigger stage, the freer air, the place where the real potential could finally breathe. But the platform they left already had a functioning American bridge, already pulling in millions, already channeling growing sums back to the causes. The reach they supposedly had to escape to find was, in structural terms, already theirs. Let me be precise, because the guardrails matter here and I take them seriously. This is not America choosing the Royal Foundation over the Sussexes. It is not a popularity contest with a winner. Donors give for 100 private reasons, and I am not going to pretend to read their minds. What I am saying is narrower and, I think, harder to argue with. The institutional route into American money did not have to be invented from nothing. It existed. It was mature. It was growing, which reframes the whole departure. The story sold to the public was escape to a larger American stage. The record suggests something closer to a departure from an already valuable bridge to that stage. They did not lack access to America. They had a whole American structure already attached to the platform they gave up. And that, to me, is the quiet devastation of the money trail, because it turns the triumphant exit into something that looks a lot more like walking away from an asset. So the fair question becomes, what did they build instead? And what does that structure report once the launch rhetoric meets the public paperwork? Because Archewell has its own filings, and I would much rather read those than any headline. Archewell Foundation's 2024 Form 990 reports total revenue of $2,592,421. Inside that, cash contributions of $2,142,653 and investment income of $449,768. On the spending side, grants paid of $1,256,565, salaries of $913,004, other expenses of $2,935,659, total expenses of $5,105,228, and net assets of $8,261,083. Now put that beside the comparative column for 2023, because the shift is the story. In 2023, Archewell reported total revenue of $5,729,733. Cash contributions of $5,336,780. Grants paid of $1,301,465. Total expenses of $3,299,948. And net assets of $10,773,890. Read those 2 years side by side. Cash contributions fell from over $5.3 million to just over $2.1 million. Total revenue more than halved. Net assets dropped from $10.7 million to $8.2 million, and expenses actually climbed from $3.3 million to over $5 million. More going out, less coming in. That is the picture in the organization's own numbers, filed under its own name. I want to say clearly what I am not doing, because the temptation to overreach is right there and I am refusing it. I am not calling this a collapse. I am not saying the charity failed, or hid money, or did anything improper, because the record does not say that, and I will not invent it. These are accounting receipts, not a verdict on whether the work matters. A single year can move for a dozen legitimate reasons. I am holding the line on that, but I am allowed to notice the shape, and the shape is a newer, smaller organization whose reported income dropped hard in a single year while its costs rose. That is not a scandal, it is just a fact, and it sits very awkwardly next to the confident promise of a bigger, better, freer future, built beyond the palace walls. To be fair to the other side of it, the organization itself does not frame any of this as shrinking. On its own official page, Archewell Foundation presents its move to become Archewell Philanthropies as an expansion. That is their word for it. Expansion! A broadening of the mission, a step up rather than a step back. I am putting that on the table exactly as they put it, because it is their framing and it deserves to be heard in their own language before I say anything else. And yet, expansion is a description of intention, not a report of results. The page tells you where they say they are going. The 990 tells you where the numbers actually were. Those are two different documents doing two different jobs, and I am not going to let a mission statement overwrite a tax return. The public paperwork is the public paperwork, which brings us to the development that makes the word independence genuinely hard to say with a straight face. Because the next reported step is not about growing bigger at all. It is about who does the back office work, and that is where the whole story turns on itself. Axios reported in December of 2025 that Archewell was restructuring toward a fiscal sponsorship model, a move that Axios said would outsource back-office functions and provide greater flexibility. I am attributing that to Axios, and I am going to keep attributing it to Axios, because that is where the reporting comes from, and I am not going to dress it up as anything more than what they reported. Now, I want to be completely fair about what fiscal sponsorship actually is, because this is where a lot of commentary would sprint straight into an accusation, and that would be wrong. Fiscal sponsorship is a legitimate, established nonprofit structure. The National Council of Nonprofits explains it plainly. A fiscal sponsor can give a project an administrative home and perform fiduciary, financial, and administrative functions on its behalf. Plenty of good, serious charitable work runs through exactly this kind of arrangement. It is not a dodge. It is not a trick. It is not proof of anything shady. Let me say that once clearly, so there is no confusion. There is nothing improper about it. So I am not attacking the model. What I am pointing at is the irony, and the irony is almost too neat to be true. Here is a couple who left one of the most established charitable institutions on the planet. They left the staff, the programs, the donor base, the audited accounts, the ready-made American fundraising arm. They left all of it, and the reason given, again and again, was independence. Freedom. Doing it their own way, without the machine. And now, according to Axios, the plan involves moving toward a structure where another nonprofit provides the administrative home, the finance function, the back office, the fiduciary oversight, the exact kind of institutional infrastructure they already had, fully built, on the day they walked out the door. They gave up one organization's machine, and the reported destination is a model that leans on another organization's machine. That is the part I cannot get past. The whole sale was that the institution was the obstacle, the bureaucracy was the burden, the apparatus was the cage. And the record, followed honestly from 2019 to the most recent reporting, suggests something almost the opposite, that they did not escape the need for institutional infrastructure at all. They just left the one that had their names on it, the one that even helped pay for the leaving, and are reportedly heading toward relying on someone else's instead. So what does the money trail actually show? When you lay the whole thing out end to end, it shows a mature platform with 67 staff and named programs, and a growing American funding route. It shows that same platform writing an unrestricted £145,000 check to help set up the new charity in 2019. It shows an American arm that raised over $15 million in a single year and sent growing millions across to the UK institution. And then it shows the replacement, smaller in its most recent filing, revenue down, costs up, and reportedly moving toward depending on another nonprofit's back office. I keep coming back to the send-off because I think it is the emotional heart of this. £145,000, unrestricted, to facilitate setup of the new charity. That is not the behavior of a cruel institution. That is a family platform helping its own members leave with dignity and a running start. And what came back, in the years that followed, was a public portrayal of that institution as the source of the suffering. I do not think you can hold both of those things as true. The generosity is on the record. The grievance is on the record, too. They contradict each other. They turned their backs on the institution that gave them everything. It opened the door, it built the stage, it provided the security and the global reach, and when they decided to go, it even helped finance the exit. And the way it was repaid was a departure dressed up as liberation, with the old home cast as the villain. Harry let down the late Queen. He let down his brother, whose name once sat beside his on that shared foundation. And he let down every person who believed that the monarchy stands for something worth being loyal to. Loyalty, clearly, was never really part of the deal. That is the contradiction at the center of this story. And I want to be precise about what it actually is, because it is not a single number, and it is not a claim that one charity beat another. The disaster is the contradiction. It is leaving a platform so complete that it even paid for your departure, and then presenting a smaller, changing replacement as proof that the old institution was the thing holding you back. The receipts do not support the story that was sold. They tell the opposite one. And once you have settled the money and the model, once you have followed the trail all the way from that 2019 grant to the reported fiscal sponsorship move, one harder question is still sitting there waiting. When the funding structure and the institutional scaffolding are finally stripped out of the conversation, can the brand actually stand on its own? Can it produce something, anything, that people are able to separate from Meghan herself? That is the question I would sit with. Because a platform can be inherited, and a machine can be borrowed, but a legacy has to be earned. So what do you think the money trail really proves?